My name is Edward, and I'm 36 years old. A few months ago, my life was ordinary. I had a good job as an architect, a beautiful wife named Emily, and we had been married for 9 years. We had a comfortable life, a house, and plans for the future. At least that's what I thought. Everything started to fall apart one evening. Emily came home and sat me down. I had no idea what was coming. She looked at me with a strange expression, almost like she was nervous about something. And then, with a calm voice, she told me, "I can't do this anymore, Ed. I'm in love with someone else. I'm leaving." At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe she was just stressed out, or maybe there had been some misunderstanding. But when she told me it was Dan, my best friend, I couldn't process it. Dan wasn't just a friend. He was my closest companion for over 15 years. We did everything together: sports, work, holidays. He was practically family. And now, he was the reason my whole world was crumbling. Emily said that she had developed feelings for Dan over time, and it just happened. She admitted that she had been seeing him behind my back for a while. I don't know why, but that hurt the most, knowing that they had been lying to me all along. It wasn't just a sudden change. It was a betrayal that had been building up over months, maybe longer. I asked her how long this had been going on. She told me it didn't matter anymore. She was done. She loved Dan, and they were going to build a life together. My first reaction was shock, followed by anger, but mostly I just felt numb. How could she leave me for him? After everything we had been through, our wedding, our dreams, our shared life, all of it felt meaningless now. She left that night, and Dan came over a few days later to talk about everything. He came to the house like he had every other time. But now, I felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal when I saw his face. I thought he was here to apologize, to at least try to make sense of the situation. Instead, he told me that Emily and he had been going through something for a while, and that they were now going to try to make it work. I tried to hold back my anger, but I couldn't. I asked him if he had ever considered how this would affect me, how this would affect our friendship. He said, "Look, Ed, it's not like we planned this, but we're happy now. I just wanted to be honest with you." Honestly, I didn't know what to say. I told him that I didn't ever want to see him again. The friendship was over. I didn't care about his reasons or the love they had found in each other. What hurt the most was that this wasn't just some random affair. It was my best friend taking away the person I trusted most. A few weeks passed, and I tried to get on with my life. But it wasn't easy. Emily and Dan moved into a new place, and I was left in the house we had bought together. I thought about selling it, but it felt like giving up on everything we had built. I wanted to keep it, but the memories were suffocating. The house that used to be full of love now felt like a prison. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind occupied. But the loneliness was overwhelming. Every time I went to the store, I'd see couples together and wonder how they made it work. I had to go to therapy, just to deal with the overwhelming feelings of betrayal and sadness. My therapist told me that the hardest part of a breakup is often not just losing the person, but losing your sense of self and your trust in others. I spent the next couple of months in a haze, unsure of what to do with myself. It wasn't until I received a phone call that my life took another unexpected turn. It was Dan. And this time, he wasn't calling to apologize. He told me that he and Emily had talked about our future and wanted to discuss a very important matter. The words didn't make sense at first, but when he mentioned money, my heart sank. At first, I thought he wanted to talk about the house. I was prepared for that conversation. But no, this was different. Dan said that since they had helped me in so many ways over the years, and since I was doing well financially, they felt entitled to a portion of my earnings. Specifically, he said he wanted a share of the inheritance I had been saving for the future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He said that because I was doing so well in my career and had a few investments, it was fair for them to get a piece of what I had. They had been a part of my life after all, and since Emily had helped me build everything over the years, It was only right that she would receive something as well. The audacity of it left me speechless. My first instinct was to hang up the phone, but he kept talking, explaining how we, meaning him and Emily, had supported me emotionally during difficult times and how they now had a right to part of the money I'd saved for my future. I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. How could my best friend, the man who knew everything about me, expect this from me? How could Emily, who had left me for him, think she deserved anything? I felt as though they were trying to rob me, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. The betrayal was complete. I told him, in no uncertain terms, that I would not be giving them any money, that this was my future, and no one had a claim on it. Dan didn't take that well. He got angry, saying that I was being unreasonable and selfish. But I didn't care anymore. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect, dignity, and standing up for myself. I hung up the phone, knowing that things were only going to get worse. The days after that phone call were the longest I've ever experienced. I thought I had handled the situation well by rejecting Dan's demands, but I quickly realized that the fallout was far from over. It wasn't just Dan anymore. It was Emily, too. She called me a few days after I hung up on Dan. When I saw her name on my phone, a knot formed in my stomach. I debated whether to answer, but I figured it might be better to hear what she had to say, to maybe finally get some closure or at least an explanation. But when I answered, what she said made me feel like I was back at square one. "Ed, we need to talk," she started. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the underlying tension. "I know you're upset, but we've been trying to figure this out, and I think it's only fair that you listen to us." I immediately felt my heart race. Fair? It seemed like she'd twisted the situation completely. She didn't think what she and Dan had done was unfair. But somehow, she had convinced herself that they were entitled to part of my life's work. "We both know how much you've made over the years, how much you've saved. And while you might feel angry right now, I think you need to understand that I've put in a lot of time and effort to help you with everything, and now that we're moving forward with our new life, I think it's only right that I get something from your inheritance," she said, almost as though it was a business transaction. I felt my mind go numb. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife, who had left me for my best friend, was now saying she had a right to what I had earned. It was infuriating, but I stayed calm. "Emily, I don't know what you're trying to do, but you've already taken enough," I said. "You left me for Dan, and now you want money too? That's just not how this works. You're not entitled to anything. You and Dan made your choice, and I'm done." I could feel the frustration in her voice as she replied, "This isn't about us, Ed. This is about fairness. You know I supported you in many ways, emotionally and financially, over the years, and I'm not asking for everything. Just a portion of your savings, something that acknowledges what we both contributed to your success." "That's not fair, Emily," I shot back. "What we had is over. I'm not going to keep paying for the life you chose with Dan. I'm not your bank. I've worked hard for everything I have." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't want to do this, but you leave me no choice. If you're not willing to work this out, then I'll have to involve the lawyers. I want my share, and I will make sure I get it." Hearing her threaten me with lawyers made my stomach turn. This was no longer just a personal issue. Now it was legal. Emily and Dan weren't just demanding money out of the goodness of their hearts. They were going to drag me into a legal battle all over what? Their entitlement to what I had earned. Felt like I was being squeezed from all sides. As the days passed, I became more and more overwhelmed by the situation. I kept thinking about the money I had saved and the inheritance I had built for my future, hoping that one day I could use it to retire or leave something for my kids. But now my ex-wife and best friend were threatening to take that future away from me. I wasn't just dealing with betrayal anymore. Now, I had to face the idea that I could lose everything I worked for because of their sense of entitlement. And as crazy as it might sound, They didn't even seem to feel guilty about it. They believed it was their right to take what was mine. That night, I stayed up late, thinking about everything. I went through my finances, my investments, and everything I had worked so hard for. What did it all mean now if they were going to take it from me? I knew I had to act. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I needed to understand my options and how far they could take this. The lawyer confirmed my fears. Emily and Dan had no legal claim to my savings, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try. They could drag me through a lengthy, expensive legal battle, and the emotional toll would be immense. But I wasn't going to let them win. I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence, talking to my lawyer, and preparing myself for the fight ahead. I couldn't let them take what was mine. They had already taken everything else, and I wasn't going to let them take my financial security, too. But even as I prepared for the legal battle, something gnawed at me. The emotional pain was still there, and it was starting to feel like it might never go away. Every day, I had to remind myself that I was doing the right thing. This wasn't just about the money. This was about respect. And this was about standing up for myself, even though it felt like the world was against me. I knew that I was heading into a war I didn't want to fight. But as much as it hurt to admit, I wasn't going to let Dan and Emily walk away with what wasn't theirs. Couldn't. The worst part was, I had no idea how deep this was going to go. Would they back down? Or would they drag me through every legal loophole they could find? Only time would tell. But I was ready for whatever came next. A few days after my conversation with Emily, I started to hear from their lawyer. The letter I received was a slap in the face. It was formal, polite, but the demands were clear. They were not backing down. Emily and Dan wanted a piece of my inheritance, and they were prepared to take me to court to get it. Reading the letter, I felt like everything in my life was being reduced to a legal document. All the personal connections, the memories, the years of friendship and marriage were being boiled down to dollar signs and legal jargon. It felt like the last shred of dignity I had left was being stripped away. The letter didn't just ask for a portion of my savings, it made it sound like they were entitled to it. The lawyer claimed that, due to Emily's long-standing emotional and financial support during our marriage, she had a right to some of the wealth I had accumulated. And Dan was somehow included in all this. According to their legal team, since he had been a significant part of the emotional foundation of my life, he, too, deserved compensation for his contributions over the years. My blood boiled just reading that. I thought about the years we'd spent together and how much Dan had been involved in everything I had done, including my career. He'd been there for every milestone, and I had shared everything with him until he betrayed me. Now, here he was, sitting behind a desk, demanding money from me as though he were still my friend. The first meeting with my lawyer was a blur. I was in shock, but I had to stay focused. We went over the letter in detail. He assured me that there was no legal basis for their demands, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try to drag this out in court. Legal battles were expensive and emotionally exhausting. I'd need to prepare for a long fight. We'll file a counterclaim, my lawyer said. But keep in mind that even though you're in the right, they're going to make this as difficult as possible. The longer it drags on, the more they might try to wear you down. It's not just about money at this point. It's about their pride and their belief that they deserve this. I wasn't naive enough to think this would be over quickly. I knew it could take months, maybe even years. But I was resolved. I wasn't going to let them take what I had worked so hard for. Days turned into weeks, and the tension only grew. Emily and Dan's lawyer kept sending new documents, demanding more and more. They even tried to negotiate a settlement, offering to split the inheritance if I agreed to a smaller payment. I felt like I was in some twisted version of a reality show, except this wasn't entertainment. It was real life. Every day I woke up feeling more drained emotionally and physically. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't concentrate on work, and the constant reminders of what was happening were taking a toll. I started feeling like a shell of myself, just going through the motions. But I had to push through. I had to keep fighting. As the months went by, I started to realize something even worse. Dan wasn't going to back down either. He was still in the picture, still communicating through his lawyer. He seemed to believe that he had as much right to my wealth as Emily did. There were even times when he tried to guilt-trip me into agreeing to their demands, sending me messages about our past and how we had always been there for each other. Couldn't believe it. The audacity of it all. This wasn't about friendship anymore. This was about greed. They didn't care about the years we'd spent together or the moments we had shared. They didn't care about the bond we'd formed. They just saw an opportunity to cash in on my hard work and success. I tried to cut them out of my life entirely, but it wasn't that simple. They still had access to my financial records, still had the ability to drag me into court at any time. There was no escaping them. I started to think about the bigger picture. What was the point of this fight? Was it worth the pain, the constant anxiety, the feeling that my life was now dictated by legal papers and demands? What would I have left if I won? More money? Sure. But would that really make up for everything I'd lost? The answer, I realized, was no. Winning this case wouldn't bring back the trust one once had in people. It wouldn't erase the betrayal or the pain that came with it. But I couldn't let them get away with it either. If I gave up now, they would win. And if there was one thing I couldn't stand more than losing money, it was losing my dignity. I had to remind myself that this wasn't just about money. This was about standing up for what was right and proving that no one, no matter how close they were, could take advantage of me like this. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let my ex-wife and best friend tear down everything I had built. But as the battle wore on, I began to wonder, was the cost of victory really worth it? Would I still be the same person after all this was over? Could I ever look at my life the same way again? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was clear. This fight wasn't just about protecting my inheritance. It was about protecting myself from the people who had hurt me most. And I wasn't going to let them win, no matter how hard they tried. The legal process was slow, painful, and increasingly expensive. But each day, I reminded myself that I had to keep going. I had to. For my future, for my dignity, and for the life I wanted to rebuild. This wasn't just a fight for money. It was a fight for my peace of mind, for my life back. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. Months passed, and the legal battle dragged on longer than I had ever expected. The once peaceful, predictable life I had known was completely overshadowed by court documents, legal fees, and a constant stream of stress. I had no idea how much longer I could keep up with this. Every day felt like a tug of war between defending my rights and managing the emotional toll it was taking on me. The lawyers would call almost every day, and it felt like I was fighting a losing battle in terms of my own peace of mind. Every message, every email, every new legal threat felt like another slap in the face. They seemed relentless, like they thought they had the right to everything I had worked for. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. One of the hardest parts of the whole ordeal was the isolation. I used to have a wide circle of friends, people who could have supported me through this, but most of them didn't know how to react. When you go through something like this, people tend to choose sides, and a lot of my friends ended up siding with Emily and Dan. It was easier for them to say, well, maybe Emily deserves something. She was your wife for years. Or, Dan's your best friend. Maybe you should try to work it out. But nobody understood. No one saw how much they had hurt me. I started to pull away from everyone, not just because I was angry, but because I couldn't explain the depth of my pain to people who didn't really get it. And I didn't want to hear their well-meaning but naive advice. They didn't know what it was like to have your best friend betray you and your wife walk away without a second thought, only to come back demanding your future. I began spending more time alone, trying to process what was happening. It was hard to find any clarity in the midst of all this chaos, but over time, I started realizing something. I wasn't the same person I had been when all this started. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it had changed me. And it wasn't just a change in perspective. It was a change in how I saw the world. I had trusted so blindly, given everything to people I thought I could count on, and now I was paying the price. But one day, as the case continued to drag on, I reached a tipping point. I got a call from my lawyer. They had made an offer. "Edward, they're willing to settle," he said. "It's not ideal, but it's a significant portion of what you've been fighting for. If you want to end this, you can take the offer and walk away." The offer was less than what I knew was rightfully mine, but it was enough to finally put an end to the endless legal back and forth. My lawyer said that taking the settlement would mean no further court battles, and that was tempting. But something in me pushed back. I felt like if I accepted their terms now, they would see me as weak. They would think they could get away with everything, and that was something I couldn't live with. I thought long and hard about it. I wanted this over. I wanted my life back. But what was the cost of letting them win? I couldn't shake the thought that by accepting the settlement, I would be giving up my dignity, my ability to move on with my life on my terms. After a long conversation with my lawyer, I made the decision to reject the settlement. I wasn't going to let them dictate the terms of my future. I wasn't going to cave in just because it was easier. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about standing my ground, showing Emily and Dan that their actions had consequences, and that I would fight for my future no matter how hard it was. The rejection of their offer led to an even more drawn-out process. But this time, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the person I had been before all this happened. I wasn't the victim anymore. This wasn't just about protecting my wealth, it was about taking back my power, even if it meant enduring more pain. As the legal battle reached its final stages, Emily and Dan finally started to realize how serious I was. It wasn't just about money, it was about everything they had taken from me. They began to falter in their demands, and I could see them starting to doubt whether they had the right to push so hard. Eventually, they came back with another offer, one that was much closer to a fair settlement, and I accepted it. The battle had cost me more than I wanted to admit, but in the end, I walked away with what I knew I deserved. But by the time the case was over, I wasn't the same person I had been when it all began. The fight had taken its toll on me, but it had also given me something: clarity. I realized that no amount of money or legal victory could ever replace the trust one had lost. I also realized that I had let my life be dictated by people who had no respect for me. I had let them control my emotions, my decisions, my future. And now I was finally free of that. After everything settled down, I found myself questioning what I truly wanted from life. The house that had once been a home to me and Emily was no longer something I could bear to live in. I sold it and moved into a small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting over. I went back to doing what I loved, focusing on my work and rebuilding my life. I spent more time with people who respected me, who saw me for who I truly was, not just for what I could offer them. Slowly but surely, I started to regain my confidence piece by piece. But the hardest part of all was learning to trust again. After what happened, it felt like the people I had loved most had destroyed everything I held dear. It took time, but eventually, I realized that I had to trust myself again, even if I couldn't trust everyone else. That was the first step toward healing. In the end, I learned that the most important thing isn't money or success. It's integrity. The people who truly matter will always have your back, and the ones who betray you will eventually reveal themselves. What I went through was painful, but I came out stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, more in control of my own life than I had ever been before. And as for Emily and Dan, they got what they wanted. But they didn't get the satisfaction they thought they would. I walked away with my dignity, and that's something they could never take from me.